is, well, if they deport him, they got to send him to Gaza. Don't they? Don't they? But, it goes back to why do the Democrats always choose the worst hills to die on? They can't see the forest for the activists. They can't see the big picture, either because they've got some kind of obvious derangement syndrome. They hate the West. So they react to the hyper reaction of the extremist faction who, given their whims, would destroy us. There is a paradox with the United States. The freedoms of our country allow for people to preach the end of our freedoms. You can live in this country as a citizen and hate this country. However, the Dems allow themselves to be gamed. And I think they've been taken over by a force that sees the West as intrinsically evil.
Hey, John.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
You look like you're sitting out in a nice sunny afternoon.
I am. It was almost 70 degrees here. So, yeah, I'm on the porch.
Wow, 70?
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. I'm very happy.
Yeah, everything's going to start budding out pretty soon.
Definitely. I can just start to see the tulip poplars.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, is this the first nice day you've had?
Yeah.
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 I was out in California last week, and it was cold and, you know, kind of like California is this time of year, rainy and all the above. It's in the
Yeah.
60s, 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Little cold,
Yeah,
especially if it's wet. I don't mind it so much if it's dry and sunny, but yeah, if it's wet and cold, oof.
yeah, it was a little bit of both, that's for sure. I picked up the California crud.
Oh
So I
no.
had a cough. Not any fun. How's
No.
Chris doing?
He's good. He's good. He's working so he's on second shift right now, so he's about 2 hours in. So, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
He said he might be able to sign on today, but if they get busy, then he won't be able to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's got to be getting anxious to have this finish up.
Yeah, yeah, I think he is. He's looking for what the next thing is gonna be. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he'll be happy to be home, I'm sure.
Yeah, he will.
How far is his normal work from uh, where you live?
It's about 25-minute drive.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
No, uh-uh.
And driving those rural highways,
Oh yeah, there's no traffic, so it's
yeah.
an easy drive. Yeah.
Well, you are so lucky. I'm sure you know that.
Yeah.
If you lived up where Sue does, you would be in the middle of a mess every day.
That's right.
I've heard Boston traffic is kind of extends many hundreds of miles all around Boston.
Well, I used to travel up there a lot, and getting off at Logan Airport and getting in the roundabouts who did nothing but ruin my day.
Oh,
I'll tell you, I hated driving in traffic up there. I can tell you some harrowing kind of tales where I almost got into wrecks and what have you, all because of the way people drive in Boston.
oh man.
So anyway, you're really fortunate. There's a good part of the US, and of course after leaving California and where you live in South Carolina or North Carolina for you,
Yep.
compared to California, wow.
Yeah,
People would
there's
pay
not
a
much.
fortune to be able to have your little corner of pleasure.
Yep. Yeah.
But it's nice to be back in Texas where it's warm again.
Uh,
Hi, Fred.
It's
hey, hey, John.
warm in Massachusetts today.
Warm in the south too.
Yeah. About 80.
Wow.
Harold, how are you? Harold's eating dinner.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the downsides of Zoom.
Yeah.
No, I would just bring my food to the synagogue.
Okay.
Oh, everybody's got to eat, Harold.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. Got to think twice before you cook eggs these days,
Right?
unless you got some chickens. And actually, I had some of tomorrow's homegrown chicken eggs
Oh,
last week.
nice. Yeah.
You have chickens, Harold?
No, one of our congregants has chickens.
Oh,
She brings extra eggs every once in a while. for
Oh,
people to
you're-
take.
that's great. Nothing like fresh eggs. Rachel, do you have chickens?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
None behind me right now, but there might be.
Yeah. Well, they've become very popular in today's discussions, given the price of eggs.
Yep.
Well, without being too political, Trump said, "Don't bother me with the price of eggs."
Okay.
Okay.
Or
Well,
the
that
stock
is,
market.
yeah. The stock market is his fault. The egg prices aren't, so you
Yeah.
can't lay that on him. Okay. Okay. Well,
Well,
I guess
go ahead, Fred.
no, I said, I guess we have all the regulars here, so we can go ahead and get started. It's actually a long parsha that we're going to be reading. Um, we're we're at the very end of chapter 27. The very last verse is verse 20 on chapter 27. And that's kind of an interesting verse. Actually, it's verses 20 and 21 finish off the chapter. Somebody want to read just those two verses?
Sure.
The
You
last-
shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps regularly. Aaron and his sons shall set them up in the temple of meeting outside the curtain, which is over the ark of the pact, to burn from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a due from the Israelites for all the time throughout all the ages.
Yeah. And you see this if you walk into almost any synagogue, there'll be a lamp suspended above the bema. And actually, people make a mistake with that, though, because they call it the eternal light, which is not really what it is. The Hebrew term they use here is ner tamid. Ner is a candle or light. The tamid doesn't mean eternal, it just means something done on a regular basis. And a little bit later on, they elaborate on this. Every evening, Aaron and his sons will light the light. It burns through the night. But then it goes out the next day, and then it's relit. So basically, it's not really an eternal light. It's just a light that's regularly relit every day. But I guess in the age of electricity, it's easier to have it burn all the time than to have somebody come to the synagogue to turn it off and turn it on again. So we have the eternal light. Okay. Then when you get into
The light
chapter
simplify, Fred.
what? Yeah.
What does the light signify?
We don't really know because it doesn't explain it here in the Torah. It just says there should be a light in the tabernacle, and Aaron and his sons have to keep it going every day. But it really doesn't give a purpose for it. At least the Torah doesn't.
Okay.
Then when you get into chapter 28, there's some really boring parts of that because it's a long, long description of the details of the priest's robes. But there are a couple of interesting things about it, though. Um, Number one, if you go to verse 15 of chapter 28, that describes the breastplate that the high priest, that Aaron would wear. And it's kind of interesting the way it was done. If somebody wants to read 15 through 30, just those 6 verses.
Okay. And you shall make a breastplate of judgment, designer's work, like the work of the ephod you shall make it. Gold, indigo, and purple and crimson, and twisted linen you shall make it. It shall be square and doubled, a hand span its length, and a hand span its width. And you shall set in it a stone inset, 4 rows of stone, a row of ruby, topaz, and malachite, the first row, and the second row, turquoise, sapphire, and amethyst, and the third row, jacinth, agate, and crystal, and the fourth row, beryl and carnelian and jasper, framed in gold in their settings. And the stones shall be, according to the name of Israel's son, 12 according to their names, steel engravings, each with its name for the 12 tribes. And you shall make on the breastplate intertwined cord work, chains of pure gold. And you shall make on the breastplate 2 golden rings, and you shall set the 2 rings on the 2 edges of the breastplate. And you shall set the 2 golden cords on the 2 rings at the edges of the breastplate. And the 2 ends of the 2 cords you shall set in the 2 frames, and put them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod on the front. And you shall make 2 golden rings, and put them on the 2 edges of the breastplate, at its border, which faces the ephod on the inside. And you shall make 2 golden rings, and set them on the 2 shoulder pieces of the ephod below, in the front, opposite its seam, above the band of the ephod. And they shall fasten the breastplate from its rings to the rings of the ephod with an indigo strand, to be upon the band of the ephod, that the breastplate not slip from the ephod. And Aaron shall carry the names of Israel's sons in the breastplate of judgment over his heart when he comes into the sanctum, as a remembrance before the Lord perpetually. And
One more verse.
okay, and you shall place in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Thummim, that they be over Aaron's heart when he comes before the Lord. And Aaron shall carry the judgment for the Israelites over his heart before the Lord perpetually.
What they're describing here, Aaron is wearing this white linen robe. The ephod is kind of like a vest. It goes over the robe. And then over that goes this gold breastplate, and that's attached by rings and cords and stuff, to the ephod. The 2 interesting things are the 12 stones. There are 12 stones in the breastplate, and each one represents a tribe of Israel. The only problem is that Torah doesn't tell us which stone goes with which tribe. We don't really know. You can't really identify the tribe by its stone. They just don't tell us that.
Where did they
The
get
thing-
all this in the middle of the desert?
That's a great question. The only answer the rabbis could come up with, there's a verse in that when they're just leaving Egypt, they go to their Egyptian neighbors and ask for stuff. And it said, God gave them grace in the eyes of their neighbors, and they left with all kind of loot. But still, it's hard to believe because everything here is gold coated. There's gold, silver, brass, seal skins. It's hard to believe they took all that stuff with them, but there's no other explanation you can have for it, basically. The interesting thing, though, is verse 30. In the breastplate, there's a little pocket, and in the pocket, you have the Urim and the Thummim. And nobody really knows exactly what the Urim and Thummim were. Apparently, there were 2 objects, and they were used for making judgments. One theory is they were kind of like a set of dice with little symbols on them, and the priest would take them out and cast them. And according to what symbols came up, you could judge something. The other was that he simply reached into the pouch, and whichever one he pulled out, that was the answer. So it was what we call a binary type thing. it's a yes or no answer. Attack or retreat, go or stay, that kind of decision. The odd thing is that they don't tell you to make the Urim and Thummim. Everything else he's instructed to make. The text kind of assumes that they already had the Urim and Thummim, that they were always there. But this is the first time the Bible mentions them, really. And there are instances where they are used later on. I think Saul goes to the high priest before some battle to get advice, and asks and they use the Urim and the Thummim. But the strangest thing about it all, really, is if you've ever seen the seal of Yale University, the seal of Yale has Urim and Thummim on it in Hebrew letters. I wish I knew how to do screen sharing. I'd show it to you, but you might want to Google it later after this session. It really is striking. I'm sure most of the students who go to Yale have no idea, what any of it means, but it's interesting how it came about. Yale was founded basically by English Puritans, the Pilgrims who came over in the 17th century, and they really were fascinated by the Jews because they really considered themselves the new Jews, and they really thought they were reenacting the Exodus. Their Pharaoh was the King of England, who was the head of the Anglican Church, who was persecuting them in England, and they were leaving England to cross the sea to live according to God's law in a new land. And you can see it in the writings of John Winthrop and a lot of the other Pilgrim Fathers that they really thought they were reenacting the Exodus. They were the new Jews. And part of that was they were really fascinated by Hebrew. Hebrew was a major subject at Yale when it was first founded. And in the late 16th and even into the 17th century, commencement addresses at Yale were given in Hebrew. And you still see it on the seal of Yale, the Hebrew words Urim and Thummim, even though nobody knows what they were, exactly what the words mean. Apparently, they were very impressed by the whole story. So you might want to Google that later on just to look at the seal. Okay. And then the next detail of Aaron's robe is in verses 31 through 35. Somebody want to read
The
those
same thing
verses?
about the order
Yeah.
of the stones and
Hmm.
and the jewels.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for because it's very specific about the order of the placement
That's
of
the order, yeah. And we really don't know. We don't know why those were the 12, stones picked. And again, it doesn't tell us which stone goes for which tribe. There's no mention of it before or after that, those verses. So we just don't know.
and nothing in history would lead you to conclude anything about that because I was surprised because it was so specific.
Hmm. No, I mean, the tribes have symbols. For instance, like the tribe of Judah is the symbols of the lion. We talk about the
Yeah,
lion of Judah,
yeah.
and all the other tribes had symbols, but they don't. These stones, nobody really knows how they connect, which one goes to which tribe.
Okay,
So, someone want to read the 31 through 35. That's the next detail of Aaron's
sure,
robe.
I'll go ahead. You shall make the robe of ephah all of blue. It shall have an opening for the head in the middle of it, with a woven binding around the opening like the opening in a garment, so that it may not tear. On its hem you shall make pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet yarns around its hem, with belts of gold between them, a golden bell and a pomegranate, a golden bell and a pomegranate around the hem of the robe. And it shall be on Aaron when he ministers, and its sound shall be heard when he goes into the holy place before the Lord, when he comes out, so that he does not die.
Yeah, the bells and pomegranates are kind of interesting because the traditional ornaments for a Torah scroll are really meant to meant to really bring to mind of the way the high priest was dressed. You clothe the Torah in a cloth robe, and then over that goes a breastplate, and then over the two tops of the rollers go these round things, which are really meant to represent pomegranates, and then there are bells hanging from them. For some reason, we stopped doing that at Beth Israel about 5 or 6 years ago. We used to carry the Torahs around with the metal breastplates and all the ornaments and stuff, and we stopped doing that. I guess it makes it easier to carry and quicker to dress the Torah. But all that really is taken from this passage in the Torah. The other question is why pomegranates? And apparently, in the ancient world, pomegranates were a symbol of beauty. They weren't really pomegranate fruits; they were little puffball type things that were made to look like pomegranates. They were attached to the hem of the robe. But the Kabbalistic mystics actually had their own explanation for that. They said that a perfect pomegranate has 613 seeds in it, which represent the 613 laws of the Torah. And this is why the pomegranate was picked. And then it goes on to, we go on to chapter 29. And, it describes the consecration of Aaron and his sons. And this is the first 9 verses of 29, if somebody wants to read that. Well, I can read them.
I can read them. I was just trying to unmute myself.
Okay.
And this is the thing you shall do for them, to consecrate them to be priests to me. Take 1 bull of the herd and 2 unblemished rams and flatbreads and flat cakes mixed with oil and flat cake wafers brushed with oil. Fine wheat flour you shall make them. And you shall place them in 1 basket and bring them forward in the basket with the bull and with the 2 rams. And Aaron and his sons you shall bring forward at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and you shall bathe them in water. And you shall take the garments and dress Aaron in the tunic and the robe of the ephod and the breastplate, and you shall gird him with the band of the ephod, and you shall put the turban on his head, and you shall set the holy diadem on the turban. And you shall take the anointing oil and pour it over his head, and you shall anoint him. And his sons you shall bring forward and dress them in tunics. And you shall belt them with sashes, Aaron and his sons, and set headgear on them. And the priesthood shall be for them a perpetual statute. And you shall install Aaron and his sons.
So this describes their consecration. I think the key word there is anointing, which in Hebrew is mashach. So somebody who is anointed, the word is Moshiach, which of course in Greek is Messiah. And it kind of illustrates how the meaning of the word changed over time. Because basically the original meaning of Moshiach is here, anybody who is anointed. So every priest was a Messiah in that sense, and every king who's anointed was a Messiah. And then by the Greco-Roman period, the meaning changed. And the Messiah was not necessarily somebody anointed, but somebody who's going to rescue the people. Basically, somebody who's going to pick up a sword and get rid of the Romans, essentially. When they started calling Jesus a Messiah, that kind of set off alarm bells with the Romans. That's what got him in so much trouble. And then the meaning really changed again. And in the modern world, when we use the term Messiah, it's really used more in a religious sense. We're not talking about a warrior who's going to fight somebody for us. We're talking about somebody who's going to bring an era, of peace and justice and, to the world. So the term really starting here has evolved, in stages over the years to describe different kinds of ideas. It also brings up what to me is one of the most interesting questions. Here you have Aaron and his sons. They're all dressed in white linen robes with white ephods, vests over it. There are white linen sashes tied around it. They're all wearing white turbans wrapped around their heads. In addition to which, Aaron has to wear this heavy gold breastplate on top of that. And then they're up to their elbows in blood and guts. I mean, they're slaughtering animals. So here they are, slaughtering one animal after another. They're there with blood, all the blood and guts there. Plus, there's a perpetual fire going with smoke and ashes all over the place. And so, to me, one of the most interesting questions that I've never found an answer to: who did the laundry? You can imagine what those roads look like at the end of a day of conducting services. Plus the fact, that Israel is kind of a subtropical land, so they're probably sweating like crazy all the time while they were doing this. And I wonder if their wives had to do this. How do you get the blood stains out of white linen?
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Okay. So then we go over to the next parsha, which is called Kititza. That's the parsha that we're going to be reading, this coming Shabbat. And there's some interesting parts there. If you look at chapter 30 and turn to verse 11.
Chapter 30,
Let's get it over here.
verse 11.
Yeah, the verses 11 through 15. Somebody wants to read that.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when you take a census of the Israelite people according to their enrollment, each shall pay the Lord a ransom for himself on being enrolled, that no plague may come upon them through their being enrolled. This is what everyone who is entered in the record shall pay: half a shekel by the sanctuary weight, 20 gerahs to the shekel, a half shekel as an offering to the Lord. Everyone who was entered in the records from the age of 20 up shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less than half a shekel when giving the Lord's offering as expiation for your persons. You shall take the expirated money from the Israelites and assign it to the service of the tent of meeting. It shall serve the Israelites as a reminder for the Lord, as an expiation for your persons.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing about the census is kind of strange, because apparently there was a belief, very strong belief, that it was very dangerous to do a census. If you did a census that God didn't order, that a plague would break out. And we don't, there's no reason really given why the census was looked at that way. But there are a couple of examples. King David does a census that's described in the book of Samuel that God didn't order, and a plague struck Israel. So apparently there was a belief in this. But what's more interesting is the half shekel. Everybody was required to pay a half shekel. And later, after they came to the land of Israel, Solomon and built this temple, they kept that up. Every Jew living in Israel, and even the Jews in the diaspora outside Israel, had to send in a half shekel a year, for the upkeep of the temple. Now, after the year 70, when the first revolt against Rome failed and the Romans destroyed the temple, just to kind of rub it in, they made the Jews keep paying the half shekel, but it went for the maintenance of the temple of Jupiter in Rome. The Romans called it the Fiscus Judaicus, the Jewish tax, and it went to for Rome. Later on, it was reinstituted again in the early Middle Ages, and it went to support the Talmudic academies in Babylonia. That went on for several centuries, and then it was actually revived again in the modern era. In 1897, Theodor Herzl convened the first international Zionist meeting in Basel in Switzerland. And one of the things they decided was in order to join the Zionist movement, you had to pay the dues of a half a shekel.
Huh.
That was going to be used to help rebuild the land of Israel. And they somehow decided that they could figure out what a half shekel was in modern money. I think it came out to 50 cents, in American money at the time. So in 1897, 50 cents, could buy something. So, but that really, there were millions of Jews all over the world who sent in the half shekel, for the support of the Zionist movement. So it actually was revived again in the modern world. Okay. And let's go on to chapter 31. This is a long parsha, so we really can't do all of it. There is one interesting little bit in chapter 31, just the first three verses. Somebody wants to read just the first three verses of chapter 31.
Okay. The Lord said to Moses, See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of of the tribes of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with the ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, and to
Yeah,
devise artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze,
yeah.
in
Yeah,
cutting.
that's as far as you need to go with that.
Okay.
With that. Yeah, the name is interesting, Betzalel. Saul, it means a shadow in Hebrew. So Betzalel means in the shadow of God. That's his name.
Oh,
And he is the chief architect and really contractor, for the building of the sanctuary. Moses turns it over to him. He apparently is the most skilled of all the Israelites, in working with fabric and working with wood and design and whatnot. And today in Israel, in Jerusalem, the major institute for art and design in Israel is called the Bezalel Institute. It was set up way back, I think, in the 1920s before, there was even the state. But even to this day, it really is the main art institute, art training institute in Israel. Um, then the next, I think, interesting part of here is when you get to verse 12:31. Um, 12 of 30 is from 12 through 18. Somebody wants to read those verses.
And the Lord said to Moses, saying, And you speak to the Israelites, saying, Yet my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you for your generations to know that I am the Lord who hallows you. And you shall keep the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Those who profane it are doomed to die, for whosoever does a task on it, that person shall be cut off from the midst of his people. 6 days shall tasks be done, and on the seventh day an absolute Sabbath, holy to the Lord. Whoever does a task on the Sabbath day is doomed to die. And the Israelites shall keep the Sabbath to do the Sabbath for their generations, a perpetual covenant. Between me and the Israelites it is a sign for all time that 6 days did the Lord make heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased and caught his breath. And he gave Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the covenant, tablets of stone written by the finger of God.
Yeah, this actually is the first time that we actually are told that the penalty for breaking the Sabbath is death. It's actually a capital crime, not to desecrate the Sabbath. And that created a real problem for the later rabbis, because they knew that if you really went by that rule strictly, there'd probably be a couple of hundred Jews left in the world today. So they had to figure a way to get around it, but because it's there in the Torah. And finally, they came up with a bunch of legal procedural things that would keep anybody from ever being convicted. Now, for instance, you had to have been warned by at least two people, that what you were doing was not permitted on the Sabbath. And then two other witnesses had to testify that they had seen you being warned and then doing it anyway. The rabbis really, realized that you couldn't really carry this out, or that would pretty much be the end of the Jewish people, except for a very small minority. So they got a workaround. The other interesting thing I think, about this section is that it gives another rationale for the Sabbath. This is the third time the Torah mentions the Sabbath. The first time we're supposed to keep it because in 6 days God made the world, on the seventh day he rested. So we're imitating him in that sense. But then later on, it gives a second reason, or that you and everyone else can be refreshed. It's physically good for you to rest on the seventh day. But here it gives a third reason. It's actually a sign between you and me. It's actually a symbol of the covenant, which is a third rationale for it. Sort of like the rainbow is a symbol of Noah's covenant, or circumcision as a symbol of the covenant that Abraham makes with God. The Sabbath really serves that function also. It's really a symbol of the covenant. And then going on to chapter 32, then you get to the episode of the golden calf, which is the first 6 verses of chapter 32. Someone wants to read that.
When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. For that man Moses who brought us from Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." And Aaron said to them, "Take off your gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then he took them from them and cast them in a mold and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be the festival of the Lord." Early the next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being, and they sat down to eat and drink, and then rose to dance.
Yeah,
You
so
keep
yeah,
reading?
well, in a minute, I just wanted to comment on this. It's interesting. The rabbis had a big debate about this. Which rule are the Israelites breaking here? Are they breaking the first commandment, which says you shall have no other gods before me, or are they breaking the second commandment, which says you shall make no images of any kind? I mean, what if they're just they just want a concrete representation of their God? It's not that they're turning toward another God. They just want something concrete they can touch and look at, which is the case in many religions. And, because I think to me the interesting clue here is what Aaron says to them. Aaron says, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And the Lord here, the text in Hebrew uses the Yod He Vav He of God's name. So Aaron's not saying we're worshiping a new God now. He's saying tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. And so it looks like what he's really saying is we're still worshiping the Lord. We're just setting up this kind of image which sort of helps us visualize God. Um, which and that actually was a very big issue between Catholics and Protestants. After the Reformation, because if you walk into a Catholic church, you'll see statues of Jesus or of Mary or the saints or apostles or pictures of them. If you walk into a Greek Orthodox church, you'll see the icons there with paintings of various biblical figures. And the Protestants were always accusing the Catholics of idolatry because you shouldn't have statues and pictures of God in your churches. And this may be the same thing. Not that they were worshiping another God, but they tried to make an image of God. And that was the deal. But then it goes on. Go ahead and read from 7 through 10. That's the next step here.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Finally. Okay.
Okay.
There was a system in the software that turned off my microphone.
Demonic possession.
Yeah, something like that. Or maybe that was to y'all's favor. So 7 through what, Fred?
Read 7 through 10.
Okay, gladly. Adonai spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.' Adonai further said to Moses, 'I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation.'"
Yeah. So what God is really saying is, I've had it with these people. I'm going to destroy them, and you're going to be the new Abraham. I'm going to create a new people, starting with you. We're going to recreate the Abraham history all over again, starting with you, which is pretty flattering, really. Moses now has the chance to be literally, biologically, the father of the nation, in a sense. And he passes on that, and he tries to talk God out of it. And the way he tries to talk out of it is really kind of interesting. It goes from verse 11 through verse 14. Someone wants to read that.
Actually, I have a really quick question. Well, I hope
Yeah.
but so when Harold, when you read it, it said they bowed down to it and sacrificed it and said, "This is your God, O Israel." And an altar has it translated as, "These are your gods, O Israel."
Let me see what the Hebrew text shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it uses the word Elohim.
Okay.
Yeah, and Elohim, can mean, it's kind of a generic word for God. It can mean the God of Israel, but it can mean any God. Adonai is specifically the God of Israel, which is the word that Aaron used. But what the word they're using here is Elohim, which could be anybody's God.
Okay.
So I'll read the next part. Basically, what happens, Moses besought the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does thy wrath wax hot against thy people, that thou hast brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Wherefore should the Egyptians speak, saying, for evil did he bring them forth, to slay them in the mountains and consume them from the face of the earth? What he's doing is kind of interesting. He's appealing to God's vanity. What they're going to say is, you went to all this trouble, all the plagues, the whole deal with the sea. You brought them out of Egypt, and you couldn't bring it off. You didn't bring them to this land you promised them. The whole project failed, and it may have been their fault, but it still makes you look bad. And so this is really Moses appealing to God's vanity. And then he follows that with a second reason. Um, Turn from thy fierce wrath and repent of this evil against thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou didst swear by thine own self, and said unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of, I will give to your seed, that they shall inherit forever. And the Lord repented of the evil which he said he would do to his people. So it's kind of a 1-2 thing. Number one is he appeals to God's vanity. And number two is, you made a promise to the patriarchs that was a covenant, and you got to uphold, even if they don't uphold the covenant, that doesn't mean you can't, that you're free not to uphold it. You're stuck, in other words, you're stuck with these people. The covenant is eternal on both sides. And God buys it. We don't know which reason impressed God most, but for whatever reason, he backed off and let the people live. Let's see.
It
And
sounds
then,
like he's entering into a negotiation with God with all of
yeah,
these
Moses does that.
options.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a very Jewish trait, arguing with God. Abraham starts it.
Yeah.
He argues with God over Sodom, about saving Sodom or not. And Moses does the same thing. And it really is something the rabbi thought was a positive trait. They didn't really make blind faith a virtue. They didn't like that. They'd rather have people actively questioning and arguing about it. And, because they really felt that the faith you come to after that is really stronger than just being told as a kid, this is what it is, never questioning it, and just, blindly following it for the rest of your life. So, yeah, arguing to the later rabbis was a positive virtue. And they use Abraham and Moses as examples of that. Okay. And then what happens after that, though, if you turn to verse 15, and verse 15 through 35 is kind of a long section, but this is actually the punishment that God gives them. Somebody want to read that, or I can read it?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the two tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and on the back. They were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is a noise of war in the camp. But he said, it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing that I hear. And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it in the fire and ground it to powder and scattered it on the water, and made the people of Israel drink it. Wow. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought them such sin upon them? And Aaron said, that let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people that they are set on evil, for they said to me, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So I said to them, let any of you who have gold take it off. So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and it came out this calf. And
It popped
then,
out.
what's that?
Like it just popped out by
Yeah,
itself.
voila.
Yeah.
And when Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose to the derision of their enemies, then Moses said in the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered around him, and he said to them, thus says the Lord God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you, and go to and fro from the gate to gate and throughout the camp, and each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor. And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And that day about 3,000 men of all people fell. And Moses said, today you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son, and of his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day. The next day Moses said to the people, you have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make some atonement for your sin. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, alas, this people have sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. But the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I will visit their sin upon them. I will visit their sin upon them. Then the Lord sent a plague on the people, because they made the calf the one that Aaron had made.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. Um,
Yeah, how do you get a
first,
calf of gold to go to ashes?
well, you don't. That's the thing. You can't really burn gold. You can grind it up. it seemed like he ground it up into a powder, then made them drink it in water, which is really, gold is not poisonous that way. It used to be used in medicine for various purposes at one time. So, the drinking the gold powder really wouldn't have been that big a deal. But then he tells the tribe of Levi to kill 3,000 people. And
Mm.
apparently these were the ringleaders, of the people who really pushed this. Um, but he spares Aaron, the guy who made the calf. And apparently there's passage in Deuteronomy that we'll get to much further along that says that Moses interceded for Aaron, kind of a special thing, and as a favor to Moses, you know, uh, um, God didn't punish Aaron. But the other interesting thing here is when he says, if you don't forgive them, then blot me out of thy book which thou hast written. And the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. And this is really the first mention in the Bible of God having a book that he's keeping. And the rabbis really took this and ran with it. And they really made this the central metaphor for the high holidays. Their vision of the high holidays was that God keeps a book, and all year long, you write all your deeds, good and bad, in the book. And then on Rosh Hashanah, God opens the book and looked at the record for the year. Then you have 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to atone for your sins, to make it good. Go to anybody who you've harmed or insulted during the year and get their forgiveness. And then at the end of the Yom Kippur service, you have this metaphor of the book being closed and sealed, and everyone's fate is sealed for the next year. But this is really where that comes from. This is really the first mention of God keeping a book that way. And then, as I said, this is a very long parsha. It really goes on and on. But there's another interesting place in chapter 34. When Moses goes up for the second time, he gets the second set of tablets. Um, let's see, it's chapter 34 of verse 29.
29.
Mm-hmm.
What did he
29
say?
and 30, actually.
Okay, I
Somebody
found
wants to read just those two verses, 29 and 30.
So
I'll
Mo-
do it. So
So Mo-
Moses came.
you go ahead, Harold.
Let Harold do it.
Sorry. So Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and as Moses came down from the mountains, bearing the two tablets of the pact, Moses was not aware that the skin of his face was radiant, since he had spoken with God. Aaron and all the Israelites saw that the skin of Moses was radiant, and they shrank from coming near him.
Mhm. Yeah, so Moses comes down
Mhm.
from Sinai the second time, and there's light radiating from his face, what we call a halo, basically. But these two verses were interesting in that they gave. This is where a very common myth about Jews got started. The word here that's used for radiating is Quran. It's a root of the Hebrew letters Kuf, Resh, and Nun, which would be like KRN in English. And depending on the vowels you put there, if you make it Quran, it means to radiate. It's a verb. If you make it Karen, with different vowel points, it's a noun which means horns, something which radiates out. Well, in the 5th century, Saint Jerome decided to make a translation of the Hebrew Bible. Now, up until then, the church had been using the Greek Septuagint translation as its Old Testament, but it wanted a Latin Bible, and they wanted to go back to the original Hebrew to make a true translation of the Hebrew into Latin. And Jerome was about in his 40s then, and actually went and studied Hebrew, learned Hebrew to make the translation. I've always used him as an inspiration for people in my Hebrew classes. This is a guy in his 40s who still was able to learn Hebrew, and actually he did a pretty good translation. He translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into Latin, and then he translated the New Testament from Greek into Latin. and that was the Vulgate Bible. That was the official Bible for the Catholic Church. But he made one mistake in translating those two verses. He translated Quran as if it were Karen, and so in his translation, Moses has horns sprouting from his head. Which would have been a minor thing. It wouldn't have been a big deal. But about 1,000 years later, one of the popes commissioned Michelangelo to make a statue of Moses. And like any good 16th century or 15th century Italian Catholic, Michelangelo picked up his Vulgate Bible to read about Moses, and there were the horns. And if you've ever seen the statue of Michelangelo's Moses, there are these two stubby little horns coming out of his temples. And a lot of people actually believe the Jews have horns. Even into the 21st century,
Wow.
you will occasionally find people who really honestly believe the Jews have horns, based on St. Jerome's translation error. The other question is whether it was an error, because the rest of the translation he did was really pretty good. And St. Jerome was a world-class anti-Semite. He really hated the Jews, for not seeing the light and not converting. And I've always believed that it was done deliberately. It was not a translation error. He did it on purpose. He wanted to give Moses horns.
Hmm.
So when that really is the end of the Parsha, but that basically is what we'll be reading, this coming Saturday, that Saturday morning reading. Anybody have any questions, comments on any of the stuff we covered? I know there's a lot of stuff.
When we go through all this, I'm like Harold. The calf that was popped out of the fire by Aaron.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a little kid making. Oh,
Mhm.
it just popped out of the fire, and
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't really make it. I just,
I didn't really do it.
It really made itself.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, the other thing that got Moses really upset, they were all singing and dancing and carrying on
Yeah.
there. I think the term that the text used, the people had broken loose. And, if you remember the movie, the Ten Commandments, they pictured the scene as an orgy, or at least as much of an orgy as you could have in a G-rated movie. But basically, it's not clear whether Moses is really angry because of the idol, the golden calf, or if he's really just mad because of this big orgy that they're having.
But it seems to me there'd be a lot of discussion about this around Aaron and this calf thing. I mean, it's implausible.
Yeah, and actually, the calf thing came back again. Later on, back after Solomon died, when the kingdom fell apart in the northern and southern halves. The southern half was Judah, which had the temple, but the northern half, Samaria, under Jeroboam, they had to figure out what to do for religion, because the southern state had the temple. And so Jeroboam set up several temples, one I think at Bethel, one in Samaria, I think one somewhere else, and actually made golden calves. So calf worship actually came back in Samaria, I think around the 8th century. Yeah. Apparently, calf worship was big with the Egyptians. They may have gotten it with that. That was one of the sacred animals to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
And there were a number of other Middle Eastern people where apparently worshiping bulls or worshiping calves was a big deal. And of course, you still see it in Hindu tradition now.
Yeah, in
They don't
India,
worship cows, but in many places, cows are treated better than people in India.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't harm a cow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there goes McDonald's.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So next week we'll pick up with chapter 35. Okay.
Very good. Thank you,
Thank
Fred.
you, Fred.
Thank
See
you
you guys
all.
next week.
See you next week.
Okay.
Have a good week.